So, how'd you get started announcing?
I started in 1993, so probably before you were born, I'm guessing. So there you go. Yeah, 1993. I lived in Lethbridge at the time, Lethbridge, Alberta, just south of Calgary. And I got the job at a track called Whoop Up Downs. That's what it was called then. It's now called Rocky Mountain Turf Club. A smaller track in a little bit smaller town, but a fun place. And that's where I got my start, called Thoroughbreds and Quarter Horses there. And then I was able to get the job at Stampede Park. After that, I started there in 1998. And I announced there right through to the end of horse racing at Stampede Park, which was 2008. I called the last harness race ever at Stampede Park in 2006, the last thoroughbred race ever in 2008. But when I was hired, I was just calling harness racing because a legend named Joe Carberry called the thoroughbred races. He also called the chuck wagon races. He's pretty well known. But then he retired during my time there, and I took over calling the thoroughbreds just at the end of my time there. So that was my introduction to sort of big time racing. And Stampede Park was fairly big at the time. We had a race called the Nat Christie that would attract some Eastern horses. It went for as much as, I believe it was at one time $300,000, pretty good money. So that was always the biggest race every year there. Then when Stampede Park ended, it was because the new track was going to get built, but the new track, of course, didn't get built as fast as they thought. So then I was a bit of a nomad. I announced at Grand Prairie. I announced in Lacombe at a track called Alberta Downs. And then eventually Century Downs got built, and I've been announcing there since 2015.
I've been announcing races since I was 12 years old, and I'm now 21.
I guess I've been announcing almost 35 years. I started as a teenager in high school as the backup announcer at Kingston Park Raceway.
I've been announcing since around 2000. I sort of got thrown in it one day. Basically, I was doing some on-air stuff with Gary Guy. He was down helping from Flamboro to open up things, and I was actually coming back from a party and going to a concert, and we just pulled in because we had a couple hours, and I'd had quite a few brown pops in me, but the owner caught me in the parking lot when someone was driving me in, so I sort of got thrown to the fire that night, and then the announcer at the time decided he didn't want to do it anymore, so I was kind of just thrown to the fire there, and then I picked up the gig at Western Fair through Ian Fleming for about 5 years, and then had kids and stopped traveling, and Frank Salive took over there, and so I've been just at Hiawatha since. I did the race secretary gig also there for about 5 or 6 years, but now I'm the director of operations for our local college student union, and pretty busy with that now.
October 1993. So I filled in for Ken Middleton at Elmira Raceway. He went to the Breeders' Crown races in Pompano Park, and I did one race card in 93. And then in 1994, Ken Middleton left. His last day at Elmira was the May 24th weekend on a Monday, and then I started that Friday after the May 24th weekend of 1994. So doing the math, 29 years, 30 years?
I started announcing in, I think it was about 1985. That's where I kind of got a start. In 1987, or 1986 rather, I filled in for Grant Wade, who was the announcer in Peterborough when Grant would go to Florida in the winter. Grant kind of gave me a start. I also called a little bit at Quinty Raceway in Belleville when it was going. Then Grant kind of put me under his wing, and I listened to a lot of his race calls and tried to get some of the lingo. 87, I was the announcer at Quinty Raceway. On Friday nights, I was the announcer at Elmira Raceway on Monday nights, and I hope it's not an omen, but both those tracks no longer exist since I called there. But I got back into announcing a little bit more full-time. My full-time job really didn't allow for it. But I was at Kawartha Downs in 1998. At the time, I had my kids were younger, so it was difficult to commit for any long term. But since 2005, I've been the full-time announcer at Kawartha Downs, and on occasion, I've had the the pleasure of filling in at other racetracks when they've had a shortage. So,
I've been an announcer at Mohawk Park since 2006. I worked for the company since 1998. I started doing TV, but then when Frank Salive announced his retirement, I moved into the booth. So yeah, 2006 was my start year.
I've been announcing since maybe 14, 15 years of age, my mid-teens. I started to dabble in it with the qualifiers and started working at smaller tracks in Ontario. So I'm going to say, at least over 40 years now. This is my 32nd year at the Meadowlands.
I started announcing when I was 17, so I don't really know if I want to do the math on this or not, but it's been a long time. It's been over 30 years that I've been calling races. Not all of it full time, but yeah, I started when I was 17, probably, I guess, one of the youngest announcers in Canada at that time doing it, and got my start at the Summerside Raceway, and have been, at least dabbling in it ever since.
I began announcing horse races back in 2006. I was living in Prince Edward Island, had a fine job, wanted to call a race. It was a dream of mine. Went to Edmonton in the winter of 2006 to work at Northlands Park. Spent about 8 years there. A job came up in London during the summer of 2013, and to get closer to home of Prince Edward Island, I drove from Alberta to London. I've been here ever since, about 10 years, so 18 years in total.
Well, I called my first race in October 28th of 1977. This is year number 46. And still love every moment of it. Love going to the track.
Officially as a full-time announcer, probably since 1989, when the opportunity went my way to go to Hong Kong. I had this chance to basically turn what was a part-time passion into a full-time living. Because of that opportunity, I sort of moved out of Australia, and that led to other opportunities. So 1989, but I really started announcing practicing as an announcer way back. I mean, I was probably 21, and in the 80s, I was busy learning the game.
I started in 1960. I was a senior in high school, and my uncle had been announcing races since 1953. And he called me one day and he said, "You want to go down to Wilmington, Ohio? They got a matinee race program this afternoon." And I said, "Sure, I'll go." So I went with him, and after the first race, over the PA system, he says, "Roger Houston, come to the judges stand right away." And I went to the judges stand, and he says, "I got to go to the bathroom. Do this post parade. I'll be back in time to call the race." I said, "Okay." So I did the post parade. Horses are going to the gate, and Don hasn't come back. And I said to the presiding judge, I said, "What do I do?" And he says, "Call the race. You'll be all right." Uncle Don didn't come back the rest of the afternoon. I ended up calling about 7 or 8 races. And I'll say the first one was probably horrible. But by the time we got to the 5th, 6th, and 7th races, I was starting to feel comfortable, and my knees weren't any longer shaking. And that started the career in 1960. Before the summer was over, I announced at 5 county fairs in the state of Ohio, and I think I called 99 races and made about $400. And I thought, what a way to make a living, being a senior in high school. The only thing I'd ever done was carry out newspapers and bag groceries at a supermarket. And so getting something like that was a great thing. And it just took one thing after another, and before you knew it, was an entire career. I actually went to college thinking I'd be a school teacher, and that I'd teach 9 months a year and do county fairs in the summertime as a little extra income. But the day I got my diploma, I got a call from the Red Mile in Lexington. They needed an announcer for just 1 week. So I went down there and I announced that 1 week. And my entire life changed, of course, because 1 week went to 2 weeks, 2 weeks went to 3 weeks, and then came the Little Brown Jug and the Red Mile full time and Pompano Park in Florida. So, like I said, I've nearly never had to make a decision in my life about what to do. I've never gone out looking for a job, and they've all come my way. And a person's life is like a highway. You come to the fork of the road, you take the left or the right. I think I've made all the right choices in my life.
I started announcing in March of 1988 at Quad City Downs in East Moline, Illinois. That's about 150 miles west of Chicago, which is where I'm from.
So I started at Parx in November of 2022, so I'm coming up on 1 year, which has been very exciting. I called my first race in 2014 at Suffolk Downs, which was sort of a one-off. There was a big storm and no one else was there to do it, so I jumped in last minute. And then I called some quarter horse races at Sam Houston a few weekends here and there, but I started at Parx pretty green.
Well, I started off as a young reporter in the 70s, and I was grabbing every assignment that I could in radio and television. Actually, I started off working radio and television. One of my jobs took me to Sudbury, and in those years, Sudbury Downs existed. So in between the 6 and 11 p.m. news on what was then CKSO radio and television in Sudbury, Ontario, I would dash out to Sudbury Downs. And the general manager / announcer / race secretary of the day, Ken Ledrew, trained me to announce harness races. And I had come from being a serious fan growing up near Windsor, Detroit. Windsor Raceway was the home track, so I got to see the great horses of the early 70s era, vivid memories of Joe O'Brien bringing Fresh Yankee to town. Pat Crow brought Cam Fella, and there was all kinds of... Stanley Dancer came with Albatross in the early 70s. So it was a great, great era to have been a fan of harness racing and growing up in close proximity in Leamington, Ontario, to Windsor Raceway.
I entered a contest back in 1993 at Flamboro Downs. The announcer at the time was a gentleman by the name of Ken Hornick, and they put out a call to any race fans who wanted to try their hands at announcing. And so I entered and I won, and that's a bit amazing. I'll get to that story later. But after that, my family moved to Elmira, and I spent too many days trying to pick a winner at the racetrack, and I used to wander off to the track up the road often. I would tell my wife I was going for milk, and I'd return like 4 hours later. And I always threw out a note to Kelly Spencer saying I'd love to try my hand at announcing, but there just were no positions available. But Rick Ryer, who was the announcer at Hanover Raceway and is again now, Rick took over the general manager's position, and they were looking for an announcer, and Rick gave me a shot, and I really appreciate that. I was the full-time announcer at Hanover for 3 years. I had to give that up when my family moved and we started having young children, and I couldn't commit to every Saturday night. And then I found it was hard to get a gig again, and I thankfully one Sunday about 8 or 9 years later, they needed somebody at Clinton. I filled in a couple of times, and I'm so grateful that they give me a chance to keep announcing there. And this, at Clinton, I've announced, I've shared the job with some fabulous announcers, people like Ken Middleton, Greg Blanchard, this year Shannon Sugar Doyle, Frank Salive, and people who are much bigger names than myself. And I'm incredibly grateful to Jessica Carnahan and Ian Fleming. They've always had me back. I try my best, and I really enjoy it there, and I'm really grateful for them giving me that opportunity. So For the last, I want to say 16, 17 years, I'm up at Clinton and doing about 6 or 7 Sunday afternoons each summer, and I have a lot of fun doing it.
Well, since 78, so at Fraser, 45 years. And I started at Hastings in 1990, so I'm working on 32. So it's been a long time, but it's been good. Obviously, there's drawbacks, when you're racing as much as we used to do, 4 or 5 days a week, and trying to fit family vacations in and things. But you know what? In the end, it worked out okay. And the days off I got during the week, we worked weekends. That was what we did. I mean, it was okay because we get to go golf on off days when the courses aren't busy, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So, yes, we didn't get weekends off, but there was other perks that went with it. So, am I happy? Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way things have gone. And when you look at it, it's been a great career so far.
So I started announcing in 1996, so over the span of 27 years, but I was away from it for about 12 years when I had decided to open a restaurant. So I had a restaurant for about 12 years. So, but overall, I've been involved over 27 years and have announced for 15 years.
I started in 2008 at Scioto Downs, and then I'm not sure when date in Miami Valley came around. I think it was around 2014, but I've been the only announcer at Dayton. I started the first year here. The former announcer at Lebanon Raceway took over at Miami Valley when they opened their first year, but he didn't really like the 5/8 mile track, the style of racing, and he'd been doing it a few years and he had some health issues, so he retired, and then I started the second year at Miami Valley, and I've been there ever since.
This is my second year announcing professionally. I've been guest calling races maybe for, 4 or 5 years. I'd only called 15 races live before Fort Erie hired me. So I'm very glad they took a chance on me because I didn't have much of a resume announcing wise.
Been announcing since I was 17. I backed up my dad in Saskatoon at Martin Stones, just a small track in Saskatchewan, and just fell in love with it instantly.
I kind of fell into this job in 1987. I was in college and I was looking for an internship. And back then we didn't have email. I actually sent an actual letter to Roger Huston, who was, of course, the longtime voice of the Meadows. I was just looking for an internship in the PR office. And he got a hold of me the next day and said, look, I need somebody to be an in-house announcer one night a week. Back then, Roger was hosting the TV show. And if you were at the track, the only time you would hear him would be for the race calls themselves. All the post parades, the order of finish, that was all done by an in-house announcer. So I started doing that in 1987, and then eventually started calling races. And I ended up getting my internship in the PR office that I was originally looking for. But I started working at the Meadows full time then around 1988, 89. Left there in 97, but stayed as Roger's backup all the way through until 2019 when Roger left and moved on to other things, and I took the announcing job.
Now, overall announcing, I also announced basketball, football, and I did baseball. We in Oneonta was near where I am. I'm from the Cooperstown area, but we had the Oneonta Tigers were a minor league team. We had them for many years. Before that, they were Oneonta Yankees, but they came in 1966. I was able to announce for the Oneonta Tigers for 9 years. I never missed a game. I did 325 straight. Then they sold the team and they moved to Connecticut. And that's when I'd always loved harness racing. And Tioga Downs, which is from my house, about an hour and 45 minutes. I said they were hiring people, and I said, you know what, I'm going to go there. I've always wanted to announce, so I said I want to get a job there, and then let me announce qualifiers. So I get there, and Jason Bloom was the regional manager, and he gave me a job. I actually worked with the judges. I had to bring them food. It was part of it, and put up numbers. So it's all that stuff. But the main thing was I was able to do qualifiers. I could do all the qualifiers I wanted. And so that was a big plus for me. I'd always wanted to do it, but I hadn't ever done it. Then the track announcer then was James Witherite, and he took me under his wing. And, you know, he actually taught me a lot. And so I was ready when it was time. And then in 2017, he left Tioga, and then I got my chance thanks to Jason Bloom and Scott Warren and Jason Settlemore, who is the CEO of the Meadowlands, Tioga Downs, and Vernon Downs. They all gave me a chance, and our overall owner, Jeff Gorell, has just been great to me. And so I got my chance. I think I was calling myself a 58-year-old rookie. And so I got to do Tioga Downs for a couple years, and then I got, as I'd said earlier, things changed, and so they asked me to come here, and I've been here ever since. I wouldn't trade Vernon Downs for anywhere, and I wouldn't have said that until I got here. Once I've been here for a while, I just love it. So technically, I've been an announcer since 2017. And here's the funny part. So on 2014, 2015, and 2016, when I was working for them and then I was doing the qualifiers, we actually stayed in a tent, me and my wife, for 3 years. But once I became the announcer, then they put me in a hotel. So it was a pretty big tent. So it was a big area, but still, that's what we did. And that was how bad I wanted it. My wife at times said, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "Yes, this is what I want." I said, if I'm going to get it, I got to continue. And I got to push and show them that I'll do anything I can to get it. And in the end, it worked. And it was great people I worked with too.
So I've been a racing fan all my life, but I've only actually been calling races for the last 5 years.
Oh, I guess my first time I ever announced a race was when I was 14. So that would have been in 1986. And that was in Monticello. Thanks to Howard Oil allowing me to do that and butchering an entire race for him. And then I ended up picking up some fairs. I moved to Kentucky. I did some fairs in Kentucky, Georgia. Ended up going down to Hawkinsville for one year. And then I picked up Ohio fairs. I moved up to Ohio. And then I eventually started announcing. I did my own shows on Facebook. I used to do a harness racing replays page. And then I switched over to Harness Racing Symposium 101 on Facebook. Started doing shows for Running Aces and Rosecroft Raceway. Got to meet Pete Medhurst, who allowed me to announce an entire card there a couple of times. So that was really nice. And did some announcing at Running Aces as well. And eventually ended up in Canada. I did a race call there for Sugar for Shannon Doyle. And, made my rounds, made my rotations. And then when the Northville position came up, I got a phone call. Somebody was interested in me doing the announcing up here, so they told me to give Mike Carlo a call, and I did, and here I am.
I started my first race call was Arapahoe Park 2016, so 7 years.
I have been announcing since I was 16. I started back in 1985 on the Illinois County Fair circuit. My father, Carl, was a track announcer, and in fact his career took him all the way to the U.S. Hall of Fame in Goshen, New York. So I got my start when my dad would be double booked, and that would happen, especially with rainouts. County fair tracks, at least in Illinois, for the most part, they are not all-weather surfaces. So if there would be a rainout and a program would be delayed 24 hours and then my dad would be double booked, I would go and I would fill in and help. So that started, it's hard for me to believe, 38 years ago was when my career began. And my first race call was a trotting race, which was held at the Coles County Fair in Charleston, Illinois. And I remember the winner's name was a trotter named Heather Glory. The owner and breeder was a man with Scottish heritage. And with heather being a plant that is native to Scotland, he would always attach the name Heather to all of his horses. And Heather Glory was either a son or daughter of the stallion Dream of Glory. So that might be some background that some of your harness racing fans might recognize.
I've been calling races for several years now. I'd have to really think to remember the first time I did call a race. I'm pretty sure the first card I ever called was at Woodbine racetrack. So obviously they haven't been racing standardbreds there now for several years. I kind of got my start calling races through just being at the track. I had a position on the communications team at Woodbine where I would be wherever the standardbred racing was during the year. If it was at Woodbine or at Mohawk, I just followed it along and did a lot of reporting and our press releases. And because I was at the track all the time, it was suggested to me that maybe I should try calling the qualifiers just in case should something come up and then they need an announcer and to fill in at the last second, I could possibly do it. So I had a background in broadcasting, and I was also broadcasting hockey. So I guess it seemed like a natural fit.
I called my first race in Tucson, Arizona at Rideau Park in January of 2005. From there, I went to River Downs in Cincinnati, but I've actually been employed as the announcer at Gulfstream Park, at least in some capacity now, for over 10 years. I started when we had summertime racing in 2013. So I've been here at Gulfstream for 10 years now, and certainly glad to be here as I'm a Florida bred, so it's great to be home.
I started in 2020. That was my first summer of it, and it's been crazy.
In terms of horse racing, I've been doing it since I was 18 years old. Scott Warren, who's now the racing secretary at the Meadowlands, he and I were the same age when we were both 18. I was working, my first radio job was down on the Eastern Shore. I was broadcasting Pocomoke High School basketball, and I would go up to Ocean Downs, and there was a gentleman from New York who would come down during the summer. He was the track announcer there, Mike Keitel, and he basically taught Scott and I all of the fundamentals, the ins, the outs. From time to time, he would let us do a post parade. And when you're 18 years old and you're trying to be a track announcer doing a post parade, you think that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But because we had such a good teacher, and ironically, his job during the regular year was being a school teacher. But he was so good with us, and he taught us how to do it the right way from the beginning. So we had a chance to stay away from bad habits and really doing the solid core fundamentals. People don't care about what you interject if you can't do the fundamentals. What do they want to know? They want to know, where their horse is. They want to know who's in first. They want to know who's in second. Throughout the course of the mile, all the way through 10th, 11th, 12th, depending on how many horses we have in a race. So, if you're going to get cute, if you're going to interject, some color into it a little bit, that's fine. Just make sure it doesn't come at the expense of the fundamentals. And I think that's the one thing that Mike taught us at that age. So from, the age of 18, Scott and I had that pretty good foundation underneath of us as we started announcing.
This is, I called, 2020, 21, 22. 23. 4 seasons. That's kind of wild to me. It goes really fast. So I've called 4 seasons harness racing up here at Tioga. Obviously, I have the background of being a public handicapper, and I've always liked jumping in the booth whenever kind of given the chance. So I jumped in a few racetracks to fill in occasionally, but 4 years up here. Time really flies. I can't really believe that. When you asked me that question, I literally had to count it out. That's wild.
So I started in 2007. I was involved as a fan and a spectator. I grew up in a family, I guess, where harness racing was, you were part of that. More so on the spectator and fan side. My dad did own a racehorse back in the 1960s in Sydney when he was in high school. And so we proceeded, I was going to the track from a young age. And had an interest actually in like a career in now that I'm a vice principal as a teacher, but I was interested also in radio and television broadcasting, more so on the sports side. So an opportunity to kind of combine an interest in broadcasting with the harness racing side of things. I guess that's how I ended up there, and just luckily had some help when they were looking for a race announcer. in 2007, my dad and a former horseman, he passed away last year, Howie Collins, kind of vouched for me with the manager at the track and said, yeah, Shane knows a lot about horses, because I had never called a race, and I guess everybody has to start somewhere. And so when racing was going to happen, it was like March of 2007, and just happened to be at the track there, which was not far from where we lived. And so anyway, Howie said, yeah, Shane would be good to do it. I just asked the manager, and he said, yeah, okay, then I guess you're going to be the guy. So then it was like, okay, now I have to really get serious and start thinking about how all this goes, everything from, you know, calling the race to post parades to talking about horses to all that stuff. And so anyway, really glad I did it. It's been a lot of fun.
I was licensed in 2015, and how this all started was back in 2015 around springtime. I used to go on the USTA site, and I still do every day, like religion, just to, you know, go over all my stuff and look at all the results and entries and just kind of see what's going around as a fan, basically. And I saw this thing for this Tom Durkin race calling thing, and I was just, I clicked on that and checked that out and was reading through it. I called that number a lot faster than this Zoom call went through, and talked to a lady, and her name was Ellen, and she got me hooked up. She said for $50 you can take a 3-hour course down here in Goshen, and you might even be able to call a race in the matinee card. And I was all in, and I went down there and did all that and got my certificate and did the fun thing. And like I said, on the 4th of July that year, I got licensed, because I told the announcer that was there, Mike Carter, that I was doing such a thing. He was all excited for me. He's like, oh, wow, that's going to be so cool. He goes, hey, you should come up to the booth one of these times when you're up at the track. So I said, yeah, I'll take you up on that. So that one Saturday I went up there in that spring, took me up to the booth, and I remember him asking me, he goes, man, you seem to be pretty hyped up about this. He goes, how come you never attempted anything like that before? Because at that time I was in my late 30s. And I said, well, I always thought you had to be college educated to do this. I didn't. And he started laughing in the elevator. He was laughing at me. He's like, you don't have to be college educated to do this. He goes, it would help, but you don't have to be. He goes, all you got to do is, you know the racing, you know how to say all the terminology and stuff for the racing. I said, yeah, I know all that stuff. So, you know, he showed me around and all that stuff. And then he said, hey, he goes, I'll do you a favor. He goes, come on up here and I'll have you call a couple of qualifying races. We'll do it offline, so to speak. I got this recorder thing on my smartphone, and I'll record you, and we'll go back and listen to the call, and we'll see how you do, and we'll get you prepared for the thing you're going to do down in Goshen. I said, oh, that'd be great. So we did that, and I remember the first qualifier I called, he looked at me, and when I was done, and he's like, hey, I thought you said you never called any of these before. I said, well, I never have called a race before. I said I did a lot of like fun stuff when I was, you know, a child and stuff like that, playing around with it, but never for real, you know. And I used to like bark out programs right up until last year. I would fill out programs from predominantly here in like Northfield Park and just read them off just to get used to, you know, saying names of people and horses and all that stuff, and giving out, you know, doing like mock post parades and results. Of course, I never had any races to call because I just didn't have any. And so that just kind of went from there. And I don't know, I had to learn this thing on the fly, but I've learned quick, obviously. In this few years that I've been doing this, I've got a lot further than I thought I would.
I believe I first started announcing in 2005, out of a sheer emergency. I really didn't have any desire to be an announcer, or I definitely didn't know what I was doing. On top of that, bad combination to start your announcing career. But I was a teller at the Red Mile, and they had a situation where the guy that was the announcer was also the race secretary and general manager, among various other things. A good friend of mine named Kevin Mack, and he needed someone to run up and call the first few races of the night. You know, he was stuck in the race off, still doing the draws and whatnot. So, you know, out of sheer desperation, me being on the property, he encouraged me to go do so. And I went up and tried it, never had practiced, never had talked to anybody that was an announcer, really. I'd set up with him on maybe a few occasions upstairs, but it was horrific. And that's how sort of my announcing career. I did embarrass myself and learning a little more about the craft, and to the point where I could at least get serviceable. But that's what happened. I did a couple of years of that, just fill-ins on once a week for a few races apart, and then eventually, I think out of sheer desperation, he left, and I was the only guy in the building that had ever turned on a microphone before. So I got that job that I've had, I think, on a regular basis, at least for the Red Mile, since 2007 or 8.
I got started honestly calling greyhound races in Phoenix in 1996. I did that for a year, and from there I went to Sam Houston Race Park in Houston, Texas, where I was the announcer for 12 years, and I enjoyed 10 of them very much. After that, I was at Turf Paradise, which that's my home track. When I was at Arizona State University, I would often skip out on afternoon classes to head out to Turf Paradise and take in a few races during the afternoon. And I was there for 6 years. I was at Evangeline Downs in Louisiana for 5+ years, and now I've been here at Harrah's Hoosier Park for 3 years. And there have been other stops along the way. I did some summers in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I did have a summer at Vernon Downs in 2014, which was great. I got to call Father Patrick winning the Zweig, their big race up there. So, and I loved Vernon Downs. It was about a half hour away from Cooperstown, so I made a few jaunts over there to the Hall of Fame and got to see a lot of the great stuff up there too.